In this chapter, we will talk about the Jewish people under Hellenistic rule. But first, I owe you an apology. My name is Simon, I am a tour guide. The history of the Jewish people as I tell it has been handed down to me as third or fourth hand history. I'm relying on historic compilations on the Hebrew Bible, on the apocrypha, on ancient sources. These sources adhere to strict standards, among which accuracy, alas, is not. Alexander the Great was of Macedonia. He set out to conquer the Achaemenid Empire in 333 BC. He had just turned 18 when his father passed away. This empire covered all of the Levant, from Pakistan in the east all the way to Sudan in Africa. Conquering it was no walk in the park. I will henceforth refer to it as the Persian Empire. Alexander was not a pagan. He studied under Aristotle. His belief system included the belief in a single creator, a monotheistic persuasion of sorts, and great respect for the Hellenistic culture. He also admired the Jews for some odd reason. His vision was to introduce Hellenistic culture to the rest of the world. Alexander conquered from the Persian Empire a vast area, similar in size to Europe. He was personally in charge of everything. He was the general, the lawmaker, the diplomat. Furthermore, he married 2 princesses. He lost a baby boy. He lost his father at 18. It was a very stressful life. He self-medicated with wine. That was local custom. Jews in Judea were under Persian rule for over 200 years. They had a good deal going on for them. The Persians allowed them to run their own small but Jewish state, and in return they were supportive of the Persian cause against Greece, and were quite open about it. Judea was run by a council of elders, led by a high priest. When Alexander the Great marched in on his way to conquer Egypt, he was received in Jerusalem by Simon the Just, the high priest. To everyone's relief, Alexander did not begrudge Judea for their support of the opposing team. He gave the Jews a Bill of Rights that enabled them to maintain their relative independence and practice their religion freely. Judea was not a big place in those days, about the size of metropolitan London. Most of it was hills. I think they might have had less malaria than the coastal plain, but it was not a great agricultural piece of property. And speaking of malaria, the next few years apparently were very energy-consuming for Alexander. He died about 5 years after the visit to Jerusalem. After his death, the Bill of Rights he gave the Jews in Jerusalem had gone through significant devaluation. It was pretty much reduced to a state of recommendation. Let's stop for a while with the events and ask a question which is on everybody's mind. What was everyone doing all that time? It has always been a mystery because ancient historians never bothered writing about the mundane. I guess some of the time was dedicated to farming and family life. Most of the extra time was about arguing. There was some religious practice, of course. No praying. The occasional pilgrimage to Jerusalem. That was mostly it. Quite a few Jews lived in Persia and Babylon, Damascus and Alexandria, yet the religious hub was still in Judea. There was quite a bit of religious work that was run by the Council of Elders. They were working hard at the time to compile and edit the Hebrew Bible, which was still forming. Some works were included, some works had been argued about, some had to be left out. It was an enormous task, and there were many political entanglements as well as some academic disputes. And as for disputes, there was a constant cold peace with the Samaritans. They were the closest religion to the Jews so far. They were actually Jewish in many aspects, Yet they saw themselves as completely separated, and the Jews too saw them as a separate religion. Also, there was a constant bickering with the overseas Jewish diaspora. They were wealthier, they were generally urban, somewhat less conservative when it came to being Jewish. They constantly wished to have a say on how the religion should be practiced. Not only that, but they had lobbyists in the council and emissaries in Susa. Susa was the Persian capital. Overseas Jews would show up on occasion to Jerusalem on a pilgrim and wave their money around. It was very distasteful. When Alexander died, his wife, the enchanting Bactrian Princess Roxana, was still pregnant with his unborn son. The first one died. Consequently, his brother and his generals, and later his wife and son, fought for about 40 years over the large empire. Eventually there was a sort of settlement, a division that enabled life to go on. But a cold state of ceasefire ruled for a while. Actually, it was not a cold state of ceasefire. There were skirmishes all the time, and they had about 5 separate kingdoms, which meant that there was never any peace. For the first 70 years after Alexander's death, Judea was ruled by a Hellenistic Ptolemaic Empire of Egypt. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals, and had secured Egypt for his rule after Alexander's death. One of the other generals he fought against was Seleucus. Seleucus ruled from Syria eastwards. The Seleucian Empire was vast. It went all the way to Pakistan. Judea was in between those two kingdoms. It had become the bone of contention. Ptolemy Soter and his son Ptolemy II were generally successful in running the kingdom of Egypt. They had to fight several wars against the Seleucids. Many elephants and good people were lost on both sides. Alexandria became a major center for science and learning. Many Jews moved to the big city. A vast library was established, and the Bible was translated to Greek, as well as many other known books. During that period, the Jews maintained the temple in Jerusalem and paid taxes to the Egyptians. It was not until later that relationship turned sour. Much of the reasoning behind the breach between Jerusalem and Alexandria was related to pressure from the Seleucid Empire from up north. In 198 BCE, the Ptolemies lost in a major confrontation with Antiochus III, and were forced to relinquish control of Syria and Judea. It was a happy day for the Seleucid Empire, but not for long. Antiochus III is considered the Great. He ruled for 36 years. He won over Syria and took over Judea. Not only that, he established new Jewish settlements in Asia Minor, and during his rule, Rome was fighting Hannibal in Italy. Eventually, Hannibal lost and was accepted in the court of Antiochus the Great. But Rome was getting stronger, and Rome was getting closer. During the 2nd century BC, Rome had become an empire. It defeated the Seleucids in a significant campaign in Asia Minor. In the peace accord that was forced upon the Seleucids, financial reparations were imposed upon them. For the next 30 years, the Seleucids had to pay a fortune to Rome. This became a main problem for Antiochus IV. Under Antiochus IV, Judea and the Jews experienced a mutual discomfort. Many Hellenistic immigrants arrived. New cities were built for them. Judea itself experienced a wave of immigration and a wave of Hellenized Jews that arrived. Internal strife replaced the so-called stability. Hellenistic Jews became the next ruling class. Money talked, and it talked loud and much. Hellenistic Jews lived in the cities. They had more funding and a classic education. Furthermore, they spoke Greek and participated in cultural events. On the other hand, the traditional Jews lived off agriculture, paid high taxes, and they had far less of a say in local affairs. The relationship between the Jews and Antioch IV went from bad to worse. Part of the problem was that Antioch had to fund his debt to Rome. He opted to sack the temples of the countries he ruled. This did not go down well with the Jews. Unrests and riots were crushed brutally by the rulers. A fortress was built right next to the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, and in those years Hellenized Jews bribed their way into the position of high priest. An overwhelming amount of political play was taking place. The political play, which is well recorded in the 3 books of the Maccabees, was the backdrop for the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabeans' revolt took place during the final years of Antioch IV and throughout the second half of the 2nd century BC. It resulted in the establishment of an independent Jewish state in Judea. The state lasted for about 100 years. We will have a separate chapter about it too. A fascinating period indeed. We are going to take a break now. It's time for a cup of coffee. Our next chapter is about the independent kingdom of Judea. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe so that you can keep up.